Hello and welcome to the International Schools Podcast. My name is Dan Taylor.
My name is John Micton. Join us twice a month at the International Schools Podcast as we have conversations with international school leaders, educators, and entrepreneurs working and engaging in the world of international schools and education.
And finally, just to say a huge thank you to our sponsor, ASA for Education, for making this podcast happen. Now on to the episode. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm here as always with John Micton, the co-host. John, how are you doing?
Very good, Dan. Thank you. Yeah, nice to be here and looking forward to talking to our guests. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's good we could chat. I messed up on the time, but the good result of that was that you could join in the end. So
yeah, I would appreciate that.
It's good to have you here. John, you're in Geneva still?
Yeah,
I presume?
everything's well. Yeah, we got a lot of feedback from our GPT chat conversation.
Yeah.
I think people really resonated with a lot of people, and that was nice to see that the voices of Greg, Warren, and Wolfgang were really well received. And I think it's the buzz. Everybody's talking about it. It's like, who else is not having a panel discussion on Chat GPT?
It's actually a bit ridiculous. It's actually a bit ridiculous at this point, That's why I knew we had to get in early because it was going to be a tsunami of Chat GPT discussions.
Yeah. I think it's just it's getting a lot of people thinking, and I think a lot of people feel that something very new tech where there's a lot of new frontiers. So a lot of people are positioning themselves and learning and trying to understand the beast and then sharing it out. And I must say the resources being shared are just phenomenal. There's so many groups and articles. It's kind of as some people saying, it's the dawning of a new age.
And ChatGPT 4 is coming out soon, I believe. I don't know what's the timing on that, but I think it's the new version.
And Google's coming out with their version, and everybody has decided they need to have one.
I was just at Google last week in London, and just on the grapevine, you hear like it's just crisis mode at Google. Like it doesn't. No one in the education team is affected, but everyone, like there's whole teams of people being pulled off different projects and put onto AI, because they've realized they got caught a bit flat-footed, and there's a potential to lose a huge amount of their search business, which is Google's business, the advertising business. So I think Google's really in crisis mode about it. It's
interesting because Microsoft for years has been kind of been in the background, but I think on this one they played it right. What, $10 billion invested in OpenAI.
Yeah, it's true.
Whoever made that decision is smiling.
Definitely. Well, we should introduce our guest, Jeff Utech.
Who's actually in that area where Microsoft is. So that's
exactly. Yeah. Before we go too much further, Jeff, second time on the podcast. I wasn't there the first time, but how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. And like hearing your conversation, like everybody else, Chat GPT is, I think, on every educator's mind everywhere as we try to figure out what the heck we're supposed to do with this thing. So,
yep. And Jeff, international school educator and consultant. We're not going to talk about that though today, and we've got a whole other episode. So, John, we'll put a link to the previous show with Jeff when we talked about his background. But Jeff, do you want to just give us a quick overview of your background, and then we'll get into today's topic, which is real estate, something I know we're both interested in.
Yeah. So just a quick overview. I was overseas with my wife for 10 years. She is a school counselor, and I started out as an elementary educator and then moved my way into the tech area. So we spent 3 years in Saudi Arabia with ISG Group, and then 3 years at Shanghai American School. And then our last 4 years were at Bangkok at International School Bangkok ISB. So yeah, I did that for 10 years. And then in 2012, we decided to move back here. And that was kind of our first deal into real estate. And from there, my wife is, I guess we considered semi-retired, running the real estate business, working on projects. And then I'm still consulting on that end. So.
Fantastic. But I think what's important to remember, Jeff, is, you're being very humble. You did some amazing stuff. You Cotel, Learning To.
Yeah.
There's some significant organizations and ed tech spaces you created that still are very vibrant today. I know you're no more owner, but Learning To still going, Cotel still going, and Adora Learning, Kim's taken over, but you were one of the founders. And then, of course, your current setup, and that's Shift Schools, which is just doing amazing work. And if you have not tried one of the PDFs. You guys don't know what you're missing. I just love them, and hats off to Trisha and you for doing that amazing work, because I think it's such a great resource.
Yeah, well, thank you. Shifting Schools came out, during the pandemic. The state of Washington here reached out to us and asked if we could support educators because, the first COVID-19 case was here in Seattle. And so the state of Washington was one of the first to shut down here in America. And so they reached out to me and asked if I could help. And so by the end of it, we'd supported 176 districts and over 22,000 educators in a year and a half, trying to pivot to online and back to hybrid and back to full person and all that in between. And that's where Shifting Schools came from. And so it's still going strong. I love working with Trisha Friedman, who was a longtime international educator herself. Her last post was in Singapore. We've got the podcast Shifting Schools, and then tons of free PDFs that Trisha makes, including one on Chat GPT. You can go download that on Chat GPT over there at shiftingschools.com. But thank you.
So
it's
for
fun, it's just creating businesses and just trying to do what I can.
Just for our audience, go to the show notes, because Jeff has been very kind and put everything there in the show notes so you can get the link to the PDFs, Shifting Schools, and his other work. But today we're on a very different topic. Dan,
it is. We had
topic.
we had a really good chat, didn't we, about with the author of The Millionaire Teacher, which I was out in Bahrain, so it must have been in March last year. And we talked about investments, and especially how a lot of teachers essentially get ripped off. We talked about there's a lot of charlatans in the investment space, and a lot of schools bring investment advisors in. And so one of the things we didn't talk about is property, because Jeff, the audience of this podcast, as you can tell, almost everyone is living outside of their country of, where they're born or whatever. And so, I'll give you my opinion, then you can tell me what you think. We'll talk about the ways of property investment. We'll get onto that, but I'd like to talk about just buying a property, buying like your own property first. I personally think it's something everyone should do, just not least because you've got a place to go back to in your home. Of course, property prices can go up and down. I think you've got to take a long-term view and be smart. But what's your opinion? Do you think most international educators should look at buying a property if they're starting out overseas?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to diversify. I think you start with The Millionaire Teacher. It was a book that I read and got to meet him and when we were in Bangkok. And so we still follow the things that he outlines in the book, and you had him on the podcast, so people can go back and listen to that as well. And that was kind of our first place. But like anything, you want to be diversified. And I think especially as an international educator, you've got so many different ways to be diversified. And most of us know, the pay's really good. You're kind of in charge of your own retirement. That was the thing that I really loved.
Yeah.
And I think right now there's no better time than for international educators to get into real estate. I almost wish we'd have had the time that we're in now when I was back in Shanghai and Bangkok, for no other reason. To your point, Dan, buy a house. It's that property is going to go up and down, but so does the stock market. It's not any different than anything else. Yep. The difference is you can be making more money while that asset is going up and down, right? And This is the thing, especially for international educators, Airbnb is going to be your friend. When I lived overseas, there was no Airbnb. We bought our first condo down here in downtown Seattle, and we were overseas working at ISB Bangkok, and it was just sitting empty because Airbnb didn't exist. And I just think about, what did we miss out on this opportunity that when we were overseas, we could have been renting it out. We could have been renting it out and making money, and it would have helped pay for itself. So not only do you own an asset that over time, like all property, over time, it's going to go up. You're going to have some bumps. Right now, we're kind of, depending on where you buy, you could see a drop. It could be a good time to buy, depending where you want to buy. But over time, it's going to go up, right? Yeah. But in between that, you could be making money on Airbnb. And so I think there's no better time, especially as an international educator, because you just book it out for yourself. You're like, hey, we're going home from June to August. You just book out your own place. You get to stay in this place that you love or you want to be. And I know a lot of international educators, they buy a place on a lake somewhere. You can Airbnb that sucker. You buy it, like we had a condo in a downtown Seattle. You could Airbnb that, for the other part of the year.
It's great. I mean, that because we have my wife and I, we have a small number of flats in Prague, but we actually have an Airbnb. Well, we bought it together with another couple, some good friends of ours, and it's a ski apartment in Austria. And
Yeah.
I used to work in a ski school there, and it's amazing. And what's great now, which I guess you can talk about, is there's so many management services now, whereas before, like even when Airbnb first came out, you would have had to be physically present. But we have this apartment in Austria. We have a maintenance person. We have someone who does the cleaning and the handovers and everything. There's issues to solve, but rarely an issue we need to get on a plane and go down there. I mean, actually never. In the 5 or 6 years we've been doing it, we've never had to go down there urgently to rent it, So I think, do you want to talk about that? Like, because Airbnb, I mean, we'll talk about the other options, but that is a great option for an international educator, because if they buy a residence where they come from, they can go and stay there. They can book it out at the time, But how does it work? How does it work like logistically for someone working overseas?
Yeah. So, I mean, what we call that long distance real estate investing. And it's what my wife and I do. We live in Seattle, but all of our investments properties are over in Spokane. Right now we have 18 properties, 18 doors. So I say doors because we actually have 9 properties, but we have a fourplex, we have a bunch of duplexes, we have a couple single families. And so we have 18 doors. But we do, it's called long distance real estate investing. And David Green has a really good book. We can put that in the show notes. I'll go back and put that in. But David Green has a book called Long Distance Real Estate Investing. And what you're talking about, Dan, is we taking advantage of the time we live in. It's so easy. You have an Airbnb. The average right now is you pay an Airbnb host 20% of the deal, and they basically take care of it. They do all the cleaning, they do all the bookings, they manage Airbnb, and my bank account is connected to them. And every time somebody books something, I get the profit off the top. It makes it so easy to do. And same thing with all of our other long-term investments. The other 18 doors we have are all long-term rentals, but we don't live there. We have a property manager that oversees them. And that property manager has a maintenance person on staff that will go out and fix it. We've signed a contract with our property manager that anything under $500, they don't even have to check with us.
Yeah.
Which is most things. Like $500 will, that'll replace a dishwasher. So you have to get above something that is, really needs to be replaced before that happens. So, it's a great way. And there's so many ways to make it. I mean, to make money in real estate. And I think the thing that's really great about real estate that you don't get in the stock market, right, is in the stock market, you buy an asset and then you wait for 30 years for that thing to appreciate. And the goal is it's going to go up and down, but over time, that is going to be around 7 to 8%, right? That's the, international millennial or millionaire teacher. It's like over time, you want to get somewhere around 7 or 8%, which is the same thing I can do with a piece of property. The difference is my piece of property is going up roughly 3 to 4% a year on average. And at the same time, I'm making somewhere between, depending on the property, $400 to $1,000 a month in cash flow.
Yeah.
So I'm getting paid
and
to
the
own
other thing
an
as well,
asset that's also going up in price. So you play both ends of it.
That's amazing. And the other thing about property is it's an easy way to get leverage. I mean, you can get a mortgage quite easily. There's a well-established mortgage market. You can, and you probably would be very unwise to go and get a loan to go and buy stock. You could trade on margin, but it's getting into risky territory.
Right.
Property is, the way you buy property is you put it down, 10, 20, whatever, 30% of the value, and then you borrow the rest from the bank.
Yeah. And it depends on how you want to do it. And again, this is where we can, how far you want to get into the weeds, because I'll geek out.
Yeah, let's get into the weeds. Talk about it.
I just want to say something. Can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
I think it's important to our audience that's international that we're talking about U.S., Washington State. In many different countries, there are different dynamics and different interest rates and mortgages and taxes. So I think can talk a bit about. I just want to say that, different people in different countries, do your homework. I think what Jeff is saying really resonates. But please do your homework with taxes, property management. There are all kinds of different things, because I own a property in Switzerland, and definitely there were some very different things I had to navigate and some much higher front end costs than I had anticipated. This was 25 years ago. But I just think people, do your homework, go and
Of
talk
course.
to somebody. I think that's just really important, because I think what Jeff is sharing is so important, but also have the lens of, let's take that information. What's the context that I'm in?
Yeah,
It's true.
so
And
I
I
mean,
can
it's
I can talk
important.
about the UK as well, because I've got a mortgage. I've got an expat in the past. I've had an expat mortgage for a UK property. So I think, I think whatever Jeff will talk about for the US, I think most Western European countries have something similar. I think if you're from somewhere else in the world, like you said, John, it's you've got to do your homework. Well, you've got to do your homework in any country. I mean, America
Yeah,
has definitely got
absolutely.
the least friction of any country. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think there's different ways, and even if you're, one of the nice things, about the U.S. is, I think pretty much everybody and anybody can invest here. If you've got money, we'll take it
Yeah.
in one way or another. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. I mean, my wife and I are heavily involved in our properties, but we love it. It's my wife's passion, and so we're heavily involved in our properties. But you don't have to be. And I think that's one of the things for people to know is you can actually invest in, say, a large apartment complex, right? So I have another podcast that I do that's all about real estate, but I just interviewed a woman who, she basically gathers money. So anybody can go to her and say, hey, I've got $100,000 I'd like to invest. She takes $100,000 from 10 people. She now has $1 million, and you go and build a 120 unit apartment complex. And everybody's probably seen these large apartment complexes. It's actually owned by 10 different people.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to do anything, but what you're going to do is you're going to see 8 to 10% return on your money. And that's 8 to 10% a year, right? On your money. And at the end of 5 or 6 years, you get all of your money back. So think about that. I'm going to invest $100,000. 5 years from now, I get $100,000 back. And every year I made 8 to 10% on that money. And then I can just take the $100,000 and reinvest it again, or go do whatever I want. And so there's ways that you can do that. If you are into the stock market, there are REITs are coming really popular, which is basically the same thing, only you do it through the stock market, where you invest in a REIT, which is a real estate trust. And then these trusts are building 700 unit apartment buildings, and you have a piece of that. And so it works a little bit better. I mean, if you do the smaller scale stuff, your returns are a little bit better, but you can do it completely hands off. One of the biggest fears is people are thinking, well, I need to, be able to fix toilets and stuff. And you don't, not in today's world. You just, you can set that stuff up. And John, to your point about Airbnbs, I think one of the things, like, my wife and I are looking at, we've always dreamed, like when we were overseas internationally, we always dreamed of owning a villa in Italy. And now with the ability to Airbnb it, we're looking at buying a villa in Italy that we want to go and stay at. And the rest of the time, whoever we rent it out to is paying the mortgage, right?
yeah.
And you can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, Airbnb is international, so it just makes it really great. Again, know the rules, know what the tax litigation is. I mean, you got to do your homework, but there are ways to get in and make some money at it.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's interesting for international school teachers, often the distance and being in a country far away, there's a sense that you can't do that because structures and organizations or even workflows are more complicated. But I think what you're amplifying is that you can get property management there. It's far better set up maybe than 20, 30 years ago.
100%.
And especially in the US, property management companies are used to working with people long distance. You can do everything through virtual interfaces. So I think there's much more capacity, and also maybe diminishes that idea of stress, or like, oh, I'm too far away to be able to do that.
Exactly.
Let's talk logistics of buying a property, because let's imagine someone like I was, you're working overseas, you want to buy a property in your home country. Obviously, the first thing is, well, finding a property and getting a mortgage. Now, Jeff, I'm really keen to hear about the US. In the UK, if you just Google UK expat mortgages, there's loads of banks offer expat mortgages. Now, the difference between an expat mortgage and a regular mortgage in the UK is two things. One is they typically want a large deposit, whereas you might get away with even 5 or 10%. With a regular mortgage, if you're a resident in the UK, you would need 20% or more if you're overseas. And the second thing is interest rate is often a bit higher, up to 1% higher. Now, is that similar to the US in terms of how you would get mortgages?
It can be, because this happened to us, is because you get different interest rates and different down payment terms based on whether it's your primary home or a secondary home.
Yep.
And so even for us, you know, one of the things that we kick ourselves is we were never able to take advantage of our primary home, which we've got friends that just bought their first house. They only had to put 3% down, and they've got an interest rate of 2.5%. Like they're just,
Yep.
we're so frustrated. When we lived
Yep.
overseas, the bank saw it as, well, your primary residence in Bangkok, so this is a secondary home. So our
Yep.
interest rate was about 1.5 points higher at the time. I think we were right around 6.25%, which is about what they are here today. And we had to put the full 20% down.
Yeah.
Now, that is just to get the property under contract. Once you actually have it under contract and you've actually purchased it, then there's all sorts of things you can do. You can shop around to other banks. You can refi that out. You know, it's one thing to buy the property. It's another thing then to, once you have that once you own the property, then there are a lot of things that open up for you, and you have a lot of times different ways that you can then adjust and think differently about that property. And that's what we did. We were in it for the first condo that we bought, you know, we were 6.25% interest rate. And by 2012, when we moved home, it was down to 4%. And meanwhile, Seattle took off. And so we sold that condo for almost 3 times what we paid for it in just over 5 years. But we also did a full rehab, which is what we do with our properties. And that's how we add value. So when you're looking at properties, there's basically 2 ways to look at it. You either want to buy something called turnkey, which means you don't want to do anything to it. And if you don't want to do anything to that property and you just want to buy a turnkey property and somebody hands you the keys and you start renting it out on Airbnb or a long-term rental, you get with your, management company and make that determination. You can do that. The other thing you can do, and the thing I love about real estate, is you can force appreciation. You buy the ugliest house on the nicest block and you fix it up. And now it's the nicest house on the nicest block. And you have just pushed that, appreciation. And then you can take that money back out and do the next thing. I mean, I can get into that if you really want to, but it's pretty incredible how, I mean, my wife and I have used the same $350,000 7 times to buy all of our properties. The same money. We just buy the property, fix it up, take a mortgage out on it, take that money, buy the next property. So that $350,000 has now got us, I think, 5 with that same money. I think we've got 5 or 6 properties. So you're talking like 12 doors, right?
Wow.
It's just amazing with just that money. If you want to, right? There's ways that you can do.
There's an acronym for that? It's a load of letters together.
Yeah,
BRRR, yeah, BRR, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, BRR. Buy.
And what does that stand for?
Buy, rehab, refinance, repeat.
Right.
So.
See, now that's interesting because that's something, I don't, John, you can probably talk about the countries you lived in, and that sort of thing is, I mean, I don't even know if that's available here. You know, if you can get away, maybe you can get away with that here, but I need to look into it more. I'm not sure if you can do that kind of thing.
I think in Europe it might be a little more complicated depending on the countries. The other thing,
like I said, in Italy, we were looking at doing it. So, I mean, because there are some run-down old chateaus that I'm just like, you're going to sell me that chateau for $100,000 and I'm going to go in and make it beautiful and Airbnb it. And I can show you, once it's making money, then you can go to bank and say, look, I'm making this much money. I can cover all my costs of my mortgage and it's going to be kicking me $400 a month. And anytime I want to go to Italy and go taste some beautiful wine, I get to do that.
Yeah. I think different countries, I know when we bought, we had to put 40% down.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so this, not being your primary residence. The other thing that's happened, and I know from many international school teachers, they've bought in Bulgaria or Nicaragua or Costa Rica or places that initially look a very low entry point. I mean, the cost and the size you get, but you have to remember that if you're in Nicaragua, the political stability is very different. And so I know I've heard of a couple unfortunate stories where people bought in developments in Bulgaria and then things didn't go that well. So I think, I think there's certain geographic locations that lend themselves much better. You want to have some strong laws, security, banking security, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And also being able to navigate the language or have somebody that can help you navigate the language, especially if you're working in a foreign language. That can become quite complicated.
Yeah. On the Airbnb side, there's a great website called AirDNA. And for free, airdna.com. you can go in and you can put an address in anywhere in the world. You put the address in, and then it runs its little algorithms and tells you how much, like what percentage of the time it should be rented out. How much do you believe? And then you can put in like, this is how much the water is and the internet is, and this is what my mortgage payment is. And you can like just fill out the form and it'll kind of give you a pretty close idea. And it's done pretty well for us. With Airbnb properties, what you're trying to do is you're trying to see if you can break even around 50% occupancy. That's the average right now for an Airbnb.
50% occupancy.
50%. So you want to be able to say, okay, well, I'm buying this place in wherever in the world. I go to AirDNA. AirDNA says, you can rent this thing on average for $130 a night, or, 89 pounds a night, or whatever the currency is. Then you can start running your numbers, right? You start running your numbers from that and say, okay, well, if I rent it out 50% of the time, anything over 50% is, money in my pocket. But if I rent it out 50% of the time, the property can pretty much pays for itself. And now you just got a free asset that's, constantly going up in value, as long as you're political, you do your homework. But
Jeff, would you say that your properties generally are being rented more than 50%?
We have just started our first Airbnb. So everything else is long-term. We have one Airbnb now because we took one of our long-term rentals and turned it into an Airbnb. And it's nuts. We're running right about 50%. And it's just a different way to look at it. We were and again, we just got started. So in October and November, I think it was booked all but 2 days. January, it was only booked 2 days. And so it's not a steady stream of every month is the same.
Yeah.
The only time in December it was booked was right around Christmas. And it's not, it's a unit in a fourplex. We're not talking on a lake. It's a working person's, really what it is it's a working person's who's coming in, they fly in, they're doing work with some company, they want a place to stay and they don't want to stay in a hotel.
Nice.
So they book our Airbnb and then they're out again. So where people are coming in for 3 or 4 nights at a time. And it's over in Spokane where all of our rental properties are. And so when we need to go over and rehab one of our properties, then we just book it out for ourselves. And now we've got a free place to stay that's really nice. And then we leave and the cleaners come in, they clean it, and it's ready to go again. So it works out well.
I think the thing about Airbnb is it gives you options, doesn't it? Because, for example, we got, like I say, we got some rental properties in Prague, a small number of flats, and we're just renting them out long term, because we're traveling and doing different things. But like, let's say we had to make money, we wanted to make money, like we could switch them to Airbnb. We could run it ourselves. We could do the cleaning. We could do the check-in. We could not pay anybody anything. If we just needed to make money, like we have a potential income stream we could do ourselves, now, which that you've always got that option, as long as it's obviously use websites like AirDNA. See if you're in an area that has demand. But Prague, there's a lot of demand, for sure.
Yeah.
But that's fascinating. What have you seen, John? It's interesting the pitfalls you mentioned about people buying in these areas. I would advise, even in my limited experiences, to buy an area you know very well, or an area you potentially want to live in. But John, do you think these people were buying just they figured it was a good rental yield? They were just looking at it purely as an investment, or do you think they were thinking they'd go and live there sometime?
Well, I think, sitting on a beach along the Pacific coast in Nicaragua sounds really nice. And if you can get into a house for under 100,000 and it's got 4 bedrooms with a swimming pool, I think that gets very tempting. It's also Portugal right now is the huge rage, right?
Yeah.
You can go to some isolated villages in Portugal, far away from the beach, in the middle of nowhere, and you can get yourself a fixer-upper for 50,000. The question is then, are you going to spend your holidays there? And there are all these different things. I think you doing your homework, and obviously Jeff has done a wonderful job of explaining how much, you have to do your research. You have to really think about yourself. If you're going to have a place and it's going to be an Airbnb, do you want to stay there? Is it somewhere you're going to want to stay? I think they're just, I think it's so tempting. And I think, Jeff, thank you for breaking it down, because it really gives us a clear idea. I just think that so often people maybe just hear the surface story and a group of them say, oh, let's go and get this apartment together. And then they fall out, or it's in a geographic area. So I I just think that there is so much positive to going down this road, but also I think it's where you have to be a real adult and do all your homework.
Yeah. And I think there's, if you have a good, and I mean, when you're talking about, long distance real estate investing, and again, I'll put the link in the show notes to David Green's book, who he wrote the book on it, but he calls it, this idea that if you're going to do long stay real estate investing, and I think this goes for anywhere in the world, you need to have your core four set up. And the core four is, first thing, have a real estate agent, because, even overseas, if I'm going to be buying in Prague, I don't know all of the little neighborhoods in Prague, and some neighborhoods in Prague are going to be better than other neighborhoods in Prague. And so having a real estate agent who understands that is key. So that's person number one. Person number two is your management property, especially if you're long distance. Do get on a Zoom call with and interview a couple management properties. Look at the way that they keep track of money and what do they do? Are they full service, that they have a repair person on staff, a cleaning person on staff? And so you get a property management person. You can go, usually if you're looking at long-term rentals, it's usually 10% of the rent. If you're looking at short-term rentals like Airbnb or VRBO, it's somewhere between 20 and 30% of the rent goes to them. But they're doing, for 30%, you're literally not even cleaning the sheets. Like they're cleaning it after every guest and everything.
I'd add two more people that to that list. Based on my experience in Prague, one is two people to build a relationship. One is a mortgage broker. We've got a really good mortgage broker I've worked with over the years. He does insurance as well, but he's managed to get me deals that I couldn't have got myself. And you got to be careful because financial advisors, we talked about that in a previous podcast. Caveat emptor and everything, but I think if you get a good relationship with that, then he has definitely helped me, like 100%, like so many mortgages we've got. And then the second one is a lawyer, especially here in a country with complex laws like here. Someone if you work with somebody a few times, then they're always going to take your call. They know you're always going to pay them and everything. And I don't know, what do you think, Jeff? Did you agree with those two things? Plus anybody else?
I think, to get started with your mortgage broker, I know many of my international teacher friends still have a bank account back in their home country that they might be thinking about investing in, and just go through your bank. It's a great place to start, and tell them you're looking for investment properties, because there are different mortgage brokers. To your point, Dan, there are different mortgage brokers that focus on different things, and you want a mortgage broker who understands real investment, right? Real estate investing, and they'll get you. There are different deals out there for investors than there are for your primary home that you can take advantage of it as well. And a lawyer is always a great idea, no matter where you're at. But again, don't go get the lawyer that helps you set up your will. That lawyer doesn't have what you need. Go get a lawyer that actually does real estate. And there are lawyers out there that just focus on real estate. They know the real estate laws. They can help you navigate some of the things that might be going on in that city. And again, once you have this team, right, this is your core four. Once you have that core four team, then you can start even having a conversation with all four of them. You get all of them on the Zoom call and say, this is a property we're looking for a property that's here. What do we need to be considering? What are things we need to be looking for? And they can support you with that. We just had some friends who live here in Seattle, and they just bought an Airbnb. They're both from Minnesota. And they just did the whole thing over the internet because they could walk through the house with the real estate agent on your phone, taking a virtual tour, and they're Airbnb-ing it. And then their families are there. So when they go and visit their families, they all go up to the lake cabin and it sits there on the lake. Meanwhile, it's being Airbnb the rest of the time, and it's appreciating. So, so there's ways to do it. It's not, just take advantage of the technology world we live in today. We talk about this on this podcast all the time. It's just, it's not what it was 20 or 30 years ago. You just got to get the people in the right place.
And I think with that technology tools, there's a much higher level of trust in using them and understanding, before there was something about the handshake being in the room and signing the piece of paper. And I think nowadays it's the way of the world, and people know that's the way you work, and it's far more standardized and far more normal. And I think that also alleviates that feeling of, the distance and the virtual. I think with all the tools that we have. It's amazing. You hear people, they buy a house and they've never stepped in it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, over on my podcast, just to give people kind of an example, I shared the Washington State Real Estate Investing podcast. I share stories about what my wife and I are going through all the time. But I shared this story of, just because it was the end of the year, looking at a couple of our properties, and we had a property that we bought for $279,000. It was zoned. And again, we did our research. It was zoned in a way that we could turn it into a duplex. And so we finished the basement out. So the main floor was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. And then we blocked off a wall. And so there was also one in the basement, and we put a 2-bedroom, 1-bath in the basement. That cost $100,000. So now we're into it for like 365, I think, or something was the final price. And again, we did all that with cash, bought it with cash, did all that. And then we went to a bank, we rented it out, and we're getting almost $2,000 for each unit. So we're getting like $4,000 a month in rental income. Then we go to a bank, we get a loan on that property, and they come out and they, walk around the house. And they say, well, actually, this house is worth $450,000. You have to put 20% down. They give us our $375,000 back. So we have $0 in this property. We own a property and we have $0 in it. Think about that.
Fantastic.
Right? And after we pay the mortgage, after we pay the water, sewer, garbage bill, and everything else, we're cash flowing about $800 a month, or what is that? $9,600 a year in our pocket that we get to live off of. And over the last 3 years, it's appreciated almost 10%. So now if we sold it today, we'd sell it for just over $500,000. Like, you just think about, it's just, you can do this with properties. And
this is what I'm going to look into, this burr thing. Definitely. It's something I've vaguely heard about it, but now
England, be careful. Dan's coming. He's going to burr through England, through York.
Burr for Prague, England.
Interesting, Dan, when I was in the UK, it must have been in October, November, there was all the interest rates going up, you remember, and all that. And there was a lot of panic for a lot of homeowners. And I just wondering, Jeff, how has that, because you've been doing this now for 3-4 years, is that correct, or longer?
Yeah. So we started investing in 2000, like big time investing, 2018.
Yeah. And have you noticed fluctuations? How have you kind of mitigated that, or that's something that you calculate, is that, the risk factor?
Yeah, we calculate in the risk factor. I mean, we you can't time the real estate market. I think that's the number one thing for people to understand. If you've got the money and this is something you want to do, I'm happy to help people and support people. I geek out on this stuff. I've got spreadsheets. John, next time we're together, I'll show you, like, they're impressive spreadsheets. Like, I love my spreadsheets. I put in numbers and it comes out either green or red at the end, whether or not you can buy the property. But you run your numbers, and the numbers are what the numbers are. But real estate, it's never a bad time to get into real estate. Things happen, interest rates are going up, but prices of homes are coming down. And so you have this, you're trying to find that sweet spot of where do the numbers work. And it's all about playing the numbers and knowing what you can rent it for. I mean, our goal when we started, and this is, again, it's a long-term game, just like investing in the stock market. It's a long-term game. When we started, our goal is that we wanted to have a property pay for itself and put $200 in our pocket. So all our bills paid, mortgage, everything paid, and put $200 in our pocket, which is great. The problem is rent continues to go up. And so as rent goes up, that $200 turns into $250 in your pocket. And then it turns into $300 in your pocket. Like, you just slowly, because rent rates go up, and somebody moves out, somebody moves in, you raise the rent $150 because that's what it is in that area. And so that's the interesting thing. When we see it and hear it, we'll talk in the US. If we go into a recession, which everybody says we're going to go into, that's a whole different conversation. But if we go into a recession, rent rates actually go up. And so as a renter, you go up. And then we're in a housing shortage. Well, there's not enough houses, rent rates go up. So it's just this, it's an interesting game. So that you play. But you just run your numbers. You just run your numbers.
The way the other thing about real estate I like is, let's say you've got a classic like repayment mortgage, like I have. Like, even if you're not cash flowing anything, like the money you're paying off your mortgage is kind of like a forced savings account.
Yes.
I just view that like, I'm not looking. my properties are long term. It's retirement
Yeah.
income, how I'm thinking about it. But that's you're paying off a mortgage. That's basically a forced savings account every month.
Yep.
That's the interest part of it. Obviously, that's money you're losing, but the capital part of it, that's a great way to look at it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And your asset is appreciating on the other end. So it's this forced savings account. I like that analogy. And usually somewhere around 3 or 4% a year, usually depending on where you buy, but just figure 3% a year. It's not like, I think Millionaire Teacher, his goal is like 7.5 to 8% a year. It's a little bit slower, but again, right, you're paying down the mortgage and your property is gaining in value. And whenever you're ready, you can then, sell the property, take that money and decide, put it into the stock market or live off it or go buy, your next property, whatever you want to do with it. So, it's a good way to think about it.
Fantastic. Guys, I'm going to have to end it at this point. Unfortunately, I've got to go and see the family. And Jeff, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for coming. John, any final comments or anything, John?
No, not at all. But I'm going to send Jeff this article by The Economist. They did a huge thing about owner occupation is not always a better deal than renting. And they did this huge meta study. And basically at the end, it's equal, renting or buying, which was really interesting. I think it's very different because they're not thinking about the investment and Airbnbs, but it's just, I want to thank Jeff for sharing that, and definitely go to the show notes because I know Jeff will be very generous and putting various links that you're going to want to really explore and unpack. And definitely Jeff has a podcast on this, so you might want to be listening. And if you're thinking of buying a property, well, good luck. Enjoy.
Yeah. And reach out. I'm always happy to have conversations with people I geek out on. This is my second geek out. When I'm done talking about Chat GPT all day, then I go talk about properties all day. So.
Maybe one day Chat GPT will buy our properties.
Well, there you go. I probably should ask it, is this a good property to buy? It'll probably tell me.
That's a good point.
Run the numbers faster than I can.
Lovely seeing everybody. Take care.
Jeff, John, thank you very much.
Thanks both.